Morning. I'm so glad that you're here this first day of the week to be with the people of God to worship Him. What a special privilege that is. We had a great week together with Brother Greg Tidwell and his wife Peggy. If you missed that, I am so sorry. There are recordings of that have been made, and they will very soon be available on our YouTube page, both of Greg and of Peggy, if the ladies would like to see what they missed also. Once again, if you've not filled out a card, we ask that you do so. Please, if you would like to have your information updated in the bulletin, make sure that you check the appropriate mark on the box there, so that we know what to do with the information you're giving us. You can go ahead and open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 2. That'll be the first text that we read from this morning in just a few moments. We're continuing our series, Becoming You, Daily Spiritual Training, in which we look at different ways, different activities that if we will take them and make them part of our daily habits will help us to become more like the people that God has made us to be. Now, I hope that I don't burn all of my influence with you by making this confession, but I like country music. And I listen to country music on a regular basis, and it's not new country music. It's not, Hank Williams Sr., but it's not new. And so this comes from a place that is dear in my heart, from the group Alabama. They sing this song, "I'm in a hurry to get things done. I rush and rush until life's no fun. All I really got to do is live and die, but I'm in a hurry and don't know why. Can't be late, I leave in plenty of time. Shaking hands with the clock, I can't stop. I'm on a roll and I'm ready to rock. I'm in a hurry to get things done. I rush and rush until life's no fun. All I really got to do is live and die, but I'm in a hurry and don't know why. I hear a voice that says I'm running behind. I better pick up my pace. It's a race, and there ain't no room for someone in second place." Now that song, to me, is where we are as a society. We're in a hurry, and we don't even know where we're going. We rush and we rush until life's no fun. As we look at the practice of slowing, we're really talking about developing patience. Now, last week during our gospel meeting, we talked about several symptoms of spiritual heart disease. But today I'm going to talk about symptoms of something else. It's called hurry sickness. And I did not come up with these, but I'll admit many of them hit home for me. And the first one is that if you have hurry sickness, you constantly speed up your activities. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, when you're in the grocery store and it's time to check out, you evaluate all of the lines. Which one is moving the fastest and has the least amount of people in it? And not only that, but when I get in that line that seems to be the best choice, I'm watching the other lines to make sure that I really did pick the right one. Now, if that's you, you probably have hurry sickness. Oh, what about when we're on the road? You could do the same thing at a traffic light. You come up on a traffic light, and you've got two choices. You can stay in the lane you're in, or you can get in that next lane. Which one has more cars in it right now? Which one is going to get me there faster? On and on we could go. Most of us are probably guilty of constantly speeding up our daily activities. If we are, we may have hurry sickness. Another one is quite self-explanatory. It's become part of our society. Multitasking. Is it wrong, for example, to listen to the Bible while we go for a run or drive down the road? Well, of course not. But there's also a place, a very important place, for making the specific effort to give our undivided attention to those things that really matter. And yet, as a society, we evaluate almost every activity on the basis of whether or not we can do that activity while also doing another activity at the same time. And we are constantly being sold products that are aimed at that very purpose. Multitasking is a symptom of hurry sickness. Another one is clutter. Now, let's not even get started on the storage buildings. Do you have a calendar full of things that you've agreed to do because you don't know how to say no? You know, there was a time when the church, and I'm not trying to beat us over the head here, but there was a time when if the church had a gospel meeting, everybody was there. Now, why is that not true anymore? Because we have filled up our calendars with things to do. But life does not consist in the amount of things that we find to do, but rather in finding those meaningful things and doing them with all of our hearts. Clutter is a symptom of hurry sickness. And this last one is kind of the end result of it all. The inability to love. There is a phenomenon that psychologists have described, sunset fatigue, where we have gone through our day and we have given the best of our time, the best of our attention, the best of our patience to the things of the world. And when we come home, we have a very low tolerance. We're irritable. We're tired. And the people to whom we have made the greatest commitments suffer because we have been hurried all day long, and when we get home, we don't have the ability to love those around us. Most of us, if we're honest, probably are guilty at some point, and I'm pointing all the fingers right back here, of having hurry sickness. And I want you to think about this. What if God were as hurried as you and I tend to be? When we open to the Scriptures, we find that God is not hurried, rather that God is a patient God. And we've got 3 examples here on the screen. We could have listed many more. But the first one that we see is the patience of God in creation. That text that I asked you to look at in Genesis chapter 2. Most of us are probably familiar with the general flow of the creation. We know that God created the heavens and the earth and all that is within them in a 7-day period. And though it might be a little bit fuzzy for us which day He created the birds or which day He created the sea creatures, we do know that on the 7th day God rested, that He ceased from His activity. And so the inspired record says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, all the host of them. And on the 7th day God finished His work that He had done, and He rested on the 7th day from all His work that He had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all His work that He had done in creation." Thinking about what we know about our almighty, omnipotent God, could He have made the creation in less time than 7 days? I certainly think the answer would be yes. I certainly think, though I can't say with 100% certainty, that had God willed to do it in this way, creation would have immediately existed in its fullness. But he chose to create the world in a certain way, following a set pattern. And this seventh day, what became under the law of Moses the Sabbath day, was something that God did very much on purpose. Not because he needed to rest. In fact, the translation of these verses could say that he ceased from the work that he did, not that he rested. But that, according to Jesus in Mark chapter 2, God made the Sabbath for man. He set the example and created the pattern for the benefit of us. Now, we don't live under the old law any longer. We know that through Jesus Christ, we are part of a new covenant that's represented in our New Testament. And yet there's a principle here, isn't there? That God chose a day of rest. And many of us are able to appreciate that even in a society that is not bound by the law of Moses. Because how many of us benefit from Saturday? How many of us are thankful when we wake up on Saturday morning that we don't have to be at work? You can thank God for that. He wasn't in a hurry in creation. He took his time, and he did so for our benefit. But we can also see that God was not hurried in his perfect plan. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, beginning at verse 7, explains this. Now, we've been studying 1 Corinthians on Wednesday night, and so this is a familiar text right now. Paul says, "But we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory." Now, this secret and hidden wisdom, this mystery, as Paul will call it, is the fact that in Jesus Christ, through the gospel, all people can be united to God. We need to come down a little bit on the volume if we can. Through the gospel, all people can be united to God because of Jesus' fulfillment of God's plan. And so what Paul says here is, God decreed this. That is, that he established this plan before the ages. Now think about that. Before he created the sun and the moon. Now that is when time began, because before that God was with himself. And time is not important to God, but here on earth we measure time by the sun. But before there was a sun and a moon, God had a plan established in his mind to unite all people to himself. Paul says he decreed it before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him, these things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. Now think about that. God had prepared all of this before there was sun and moon. And think about all of the times when, if he had desired to do so, he could have set this plan into final motion. After Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, he could have sent the Messiah. When the world began to grow darker and darker with sin leading up to the flood, God could have sent the Messiah. When the children of Israel were unfaithful to him, constantly going after idols, God could have sent the Messiah. After they had gone into captivity and came back, and instead of rebuilding the temple, they were building paneled houses, God could have sent the Messiah. But he waited, and he waited, and he waited, until Paul says in Romans chapter 5 and verse 6, he sent Christ at the right time. According to Galatians chapter 4, it was at the fullness of time that the Son of God was born of woman. What if God hadn't waited? We can see the patience of God in His perfect plan. And it really comes home to us when we see that in the salvation that you and I enjoy through Jesus Christ. In the book of 2 Peter, Peter writes to Christians and he warns them. He says, there's coming a time that's not far off when there are going to be people who are saying, Christ isn't coming back. Because if you look, all of these who are saying that Christ would come back, they've already died. And yet the promise has not been fulfilled. And Peter says, you don't pay any attention to that. Because of this, the Lord is not slow to fulfill His promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. What if God were in a hurry to punish sin? Well, I can tell you I wouldn't be here. None of us would be here. And those about whom Peter speaks were saying, God is not going to send His Son back. He would have come back by now. And Peter says, no, you don't understand the patience of God. He's not in a hurry. He knows how to maximize the salvation of all people. He knows when the exact right time is for Christ to come back so that as many as possible can be saved through the blood of Jesus Christ. If God were in a hurry, we would be without hope. And then we look at the character of Jesus on earth. We see the patience of our God throughout time, but God is up here. We also have the embodiment of patience on earth in Jesus Christ. And you can see His patience in a number of different ways. We're just going to notice three. The first one is for the cross. In John chapter 2, Jesus is at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. He is with His disciples and His mother, and I think you probably know that the wine ran out. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, looks to one of the attendants and she says, whatever He tells you to do, whatever Jesus tells you to do, you do it. He's going to make it right. And Jesus looks at His mother and He says, woman, what does this have to do with me and you? My hour has not yet come. Now that word hour, if you look for that word in the Gospel of John, you will find it over and over and over again referring specifically to Jesus' fulfillment of the gospel plan. And so when He says, my hour has not yet come, He's saying it's not yet time for me to reveal myself in such a way that I'm going to have to die on the cross. It's not time for me to go to the cross yet. My hour has not yet come. Now we see Jesus throughout His ministry doing a number of different things. We see that in the ministry of Jesus, He is healing people. He is bringing a message of hope, the good news. He is changing people's lives. And it is only when He has fulfilled the mission that God gave Him that He says in John chapter 17 and verse 1, as He opens His prayer to God, Father, my hour has come. And He goes on to say, I have done everything that you gave for me to do. Jesus understood that He had things that needed to be done before He went to the cross. Now you might say to yourself, well, if I knew that I were going to die on the cross, I wouldn't be in a hurry to get there either. But Jesus knew that was part of it. He knew it was coming. He didn't put it off because He didn't want to go there. He waited for the right time so that He could benefit us through His example through the things that he taught, through the things that he did. And when he had completed everything that the Father gave him to do, he said, "My time has come." We can also see the patience of Jesus in his interaction with the disciples. If you read the gospel accounts, you'll very quickly begin to see that more often than not, the disciples, even those called to be apostles, didn't get it. And it's kind of maddening for us because we've got the full revelation. We say, it was right in front of your face. How did you miss it? But I dare say that many of us, if we were in their position, would have been just as confused. We have a number of examples of this, but the one that I want us to look at is found in John chapter 14. In John chapter 14 and verse 6, Jesus makes this statement that is in the forefront of many of our minds. "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me." And he goes on to say that if you know me, you know my Father. Now Philip, one of the disciples, said to him in verse 8, "Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us." Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Are you sense maybe a note of frustration or exasperation there?" Jesus says, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me?" Now, Jesus is obviously a little frustrated. "Haven't you gotten it yet, Philip?" But I want you to notice what he does. Because even though we can see this little hint of frustration, Jesus goes on to explain to Philip what he had just said. He doesn't throw up his hands and say, "Well, that's it. You don't get it. I'll go find someone who does." He explains it to Philip. He says, "Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or else believe on account of the works themselves." We could find any number of examples. Jesus is so patient with these men. We're told in Mark chapter 3 that the reason he called these apostles was so that they could be with him, so that they could learn from him. He is preparing them for a time when he will ascend to the Father and they will do his work on earth. We can see that he's patient with them. And we can see last of all that he has patience for the sinner. Now, I picked this particular example because of all that is taking place in Luke chapter 8. In Luke chapter 8, Jesus has been asked to heal the child of a prominent citizen, Jairus. And while he is on the way to heal this little girl who is very sick, very near unto death, he is interrupted. He's interrupted by this woman that we find in verse 43 of Luke 8. She was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Now, first of all, we say that this is an example of Jesus' patience for the sinner. How do we know this woman is a sinner? Well, not because she's sick, but because all people are sinners. Paul says all have fallen short, sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But also I want you to think about this. Under the old covenant, if a man came into physical contact at all with a woman that had any issue like this one, he became ceremonially unclean, ritually unclean. He had to set himself apart. He had to wash his clothing and all of these things. And so while Jesus is on the way to heal this little girl, he is interrupted. And the interruption is not a slight one. She has, without his permission, made him unclean. But do you notice that Jesus doesn't call her down? Jesus doesn't curse her. But what does he say? Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. What if Jesus had no patience for the sinner? Where would you and I be? And so we've seen the example of our God, who is a patient God. We've seen the example of his Son, who shows patience in every aspect of his walk on earth. And so it leads to one conclusion. If we're going to be the people that God made us to be, if we're going to follow the example of God set for us in Jesus Christ, we need to slow down. Now, what do we mean by slow down? Frank and I were talking about that this morning before the Bible class. Are there times when we do things quickly, and that's okay? Well, of course. Are there times when we feel like we have to get something done because we're impatient? Yes. And so we're talking about learning to be patient. We have an example here in Joshua chapter 9 of haste making waste. When I was studying at Freed-Hardeman University, we had a community game room on the floor of our dorm, and we had a billiards table, a pool table. And my roommate and I, freshman year, we played a lot of pool. Our schedules must have been far too easy. But we were very closely matched because we played with each other all the time. And it usually came down to just one or two instances, one or two shots. And Isaac nearly always beat me because I would get excited. I would see the shot. I would see exactly what I needed to do, but I wouldn't take the time to execute it right. I'd mess up, and Isaac would say, haste makes waste. It's not just true in the physical realm. It's also true spiritually. In Joshua chapter 9, the children of Israel have, through the help of the Lord, the guidance of the Lord, already defeated the city of Jericho in a very fantastic way. They've also defeated the people of Ai, the city of Ai. It's spelled A-I. And so, with these great victories, word has gotten out about this army of Israelites. And those who dwelled in the promised land in the city of Gibeon were concerned. They were afraid that they too would be destroyed. God had commanded the children of Israel before they ever went into the promised land that they had to devote everyone in the promised land to destruction because of their immorality and their idolatry. And they were not to make a peace treaty with anyone. Well, these Gibeonites were afraid that they were going to be defeated by God's army. And so they set a plan to deceive God's people. They came to Joshua and the children of Israel, but they wore worn-out clothing. And they had among their garments, among their items, moldy bread and worn-out wineskins. And they said to Joshua and the children of Israel, we've come a great distance because we heard about you and we want to be at peace with you. And here's where something that's almost haunting takes place. Because Joshua and the children of Israel take from among those things that the Gibeonites had brought and they examine them. But verse 14 of Joshua 9 says, they did not consult the Lord. What happened? They made the peace treaty. They violated the law of God. and it would become a thorn in the side of the children of Israel for the rest of the time that they were in the land of Israel. Haste makes waste. We need to learn to slow down. We need to learn to wait on the Lord. I love Psalm 37. We don't have time to read the entire psalm, but we are going to read part of it this morning. Beginning at verse 3, the psalmist says, "Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday." Now listen to this. "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Fret not yourself, or do not worry yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself. Do not worry yourself. It tends only to evil. For the evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land." Those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. We tend to think, and I'm speaking as much for myself as anyone, we tend to think that we can find the shortcut to God's blessings if only we will work hard enough, fast enough, long enough. But what does the psalmist say? He says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you." Not you will earn, not you will work for and find. God will give you the desires of your heart. Why? Because when you delight in the things that God delights in, He will be more than happy to give you those things. He goes on to say that you be still and wait patiently for Him. Oh, how hard is that? You pray and you pray and you pray for that blessing. Wait patiently for Him. Be still. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. Psalm 127, verse 2 says, "It is in vain you rise up early and go late to rest." That leads us to this last point. We need to learn to slow down, because haste makes waste, not only physically but also spiritually. We need to trust in the Lord, wait on the Lord, and we need to learn the importance of taking rest. Mark chapter 6, Jesus sends the apostles out 2 by 2 to share the good news that He has given them. In the meantime, according to Mark, John the Baptist is beheaded by King Herod. And in Mark chapter 6, the apostles returned to Jesus, verse 30, and they told Him all they had done and taught. And He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Thinking back about that Sabbath day, we don't live under the old covenant, but many of us should learn the value of taking rest when it's needed. Not being lazy, but at the appropriate time, giving ourselves the opportunity to slow down, rest. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do is take a nap. I want to talk for just a minute as we close about some various ways that we can teach ourselves to slow down, about some ways that we can be patient, and then the lesson will be yours. You can go back and look at those different symptoms of hurry sickness that are listed in your outline in the bulletin, and you could basically say, how can I eliminate this from my life? So I'm going to give you a few examples, but you can come up with several more on your own. One way that we could slow down, and this is going to be painstaking, but it will teach us to be patient. Drive the speed limit. Okay, some of you may already do that. Many of us don't. We don't know how to drive 45 in a 45. Drive in the slow lane. When you go to the grocery store, on purpose, pick the longest line. And if somebody gets behind you, let them go ahead of you. You know it'll be all right. It'll teach you to be patient. You're going to hate it. It'll teach you to be patient. When you're eating, take your time. What does the psalmist say? What does Jesus say? They didn't even have time to eat in Mark chapter 6. The psalmist says, you rise up early, you go to bed late, and you eat the bread, in Psalm 127 verse 2, of anxious toil. It's like eating a plate full of worry. Slow down. On and on we could go. But the other side of that is sleep. Now, I don't know the numbers, but I know that according to most studies, the majority of Americans above, the age of 18 or something like that have problems with sleep. And some of us have medical issues, and I understand that. But one reason I think that many Americans don't sleep well is because we are stressed. And we are stressed because we haven't learned to slow down. Give your cares to God. Spend the day trusting in Him and waiting on Him. And when you lay down at night, don't think about all the things you didn't get done and you have left to do. Give them to God in prayer and get some rest. Because when you're tired, you're irritable. And when you're irritable, you don't show love and you won't grow in Christ. We've got to slow down because we serve a patient God who gave us the greatest example of patience in His Son, and we want to be like Him. Now, there's one place where God wants us to hurry. He wants us to run from evil and into His arms. And maybe you need to do that this morning. Maybe you're not yet a child of God. Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ? You're willing to turn away from your life of sin and confess His name? We'll be glad to baptize you today for the forgiveness of sins. You'll come up a new creature, a child of God. Or if you're already a Christian and you need to return to your Father who loved you and gave His Son for you, this invitation is for you as well as we stand and sing together.